For a long time, I believed unhappiness needed a clear reason, an argument, betrayal, something loud enough to point at and say, "There, that's the problem." But my marriage never gave me that. From the outside, it probably looked stable. We paid the bills on time. We showed up to family events. We talked about groceries, repairs, and schedules. Nothing was dramatic. Nothing was broken in a way anyone could easily see, and that made it harder to explain what was wrong. Our house had become a place where conversations ended before they began. I would say something about my day, and she would nod without really hearing it. She would talk about plans for the weekend, and I would respond automatically, like someone reading lines from a script they'd memorized years ago. There was no hostility between us, just distance, the kind that grows quietly when two people stop expecting anything from each other. At first, I told myself it was normal. People settle into routines. Passion fades. Life becomes practical. But there were moments that made the silence impossible to ignore. Once, we went out to dinner for our anniversary. The restaurant was warm and full of noise, laughter, clinking glasses, conversations spilling across tables. We sat across from each other for nearly 40 minutes talking about nothing important. Weather, traffic, a coworker she barely liked. At some point, I realized something uncomfortable. If I had been sitting across from a stranger, the conversation might have been more interesting. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Over the years, little realizations like that kept collecting, not dramatic enough to confront, but heavy enough to feel. I started noticing how many decisions in my life were built around avoiding tension instead of pursuing meaning. Hobbies I stopped. Friends I stopped calling. Plans I postponed because they seemed inconvenient for the balance we were maintaining. It wasn't that she asked me to give those things up. It was that somewhere along the way, I stopped asking for space to keep them. And one morning, sitting alone with coffee at the kitchen table, I had a strange thought. If this continues exactly the same way for the next 10 years, would anything about my life actually belong to me? The question felt uncomfortable. But once it appeared, it refused to leave. So I started making small changes, quiet ones. I went back to the gym after work instead of coming straight home. I started meeting an old friend for coffee on Sundays. I signed up for a weekend photography class I had once talked about but never pursued. None of it felt rebellious. It just felt overdue. At first, she barely noticed. When she did, she assumed it was temporary. "You're busy lately?" she said one evening, standing in the doorway while I packed my camera bag. "Just trying a few things," I replied. She nodded and walked away. There was no argument. No real conversation either. Just another silence added to the house. But something inside me was shifting. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly becoming clearer. I wasn't angry with her. That surprised me. If anything, I felt a quiet sadness for both of us. Two people who had built a life together but somehow stopped growing inside it. The idea of divorce used to feel like a violent word, something people reached after betrayal or explosive fights. For me, it arrived much more quietly. During a routine afternoon, sitting across from a lawyer in a small office with beige walls and stacks of paperwork. "I'm not sure if I'm ready," I told him. "That's normal," he said calmly. "This meeting doesn't commit you to anything." He explained the process slowly. Legal steps, timelines, what separation might look like. There was nothing dramatic about it. Just procedures. At one point, he slid a document across the desk. "This simply opens the case," he said. "You can take time with everything else." The paper sat there between us. For a moment, I stared at it, not thinking about revenge, not thinking about blame, just thinking about how many years I had spent waiting for some external sign that it was acceptable to choose something different. The strange thing was, no one was going to give that permission. I had to decide. So I picked up the pen and signed. The act itself took less than 10 seconds, but something inside me settled the moment the ink touched the paper. When I told her later that evening, she looked confused more than anything else. "Why?" she asked. I struggled to answer in a way that made sense. "There isn't one reason," I said carefully. "It's more like the absence of a lot of things." She sat quietly after that. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just the sound of the clock on the wall filling the room. The weeks that followed were practical. Discussions about the house, finances, logistics, conversations that might have happened years earlier if we had known how to have them. Some nights felt heavy, but other nights felt strangely lighter. Not happy exactly, just spacious. For the first time in a long time, my future didn't feel predetermined by routines I had accepted without questioning. It felt uncertain. And for the first time in years, that uncertainty didn't scare me.